wasn't gonna eat. Another time, he asked me if I could fill up a bucket with water because his was turned off. It was just random, but somewhat understandable things like that. But I drew the line when he started asking me for money. I figured I had no obligation to be constantly meeting this guy's needs. I mean, I had pretty much just met the dude. I'd started opening the door to his knocks less and less, but this didn't seem to have any effect on the number of times he would show up. Fast forward to a night a few weeks later, and again another knock. I'd planned to ignore it, like I'd grown accustomed to doing by that point. But as I looked through the people, I noticed the guy looked distressed. Seeing this, I decided the right thing to do would be to open. I did. I asked him what he needed, and what he responded with was not at all the type of response I was expecting. He asked me if I could come over and show him how to use his new grill. Now, this happened around midnight.
How's the head? Your feet
against
now.
my better judgment, I
I
decided
know
I would
this place
help him.
isn't exactly
I was pretty into
paradise,
cooking at that point in my
but
life,
you're
and figured
not
taking
here
10
on
I was pretty into
paradise,
cooking at that point in my
but
life, and
you're
figured
not
taking
here
10
on
minutes to show the guy how a
vacation.
grill worked
Oops,
wouldn't be the
on
minutes to show the guy how a
vacation.
grill worked wouldn't be the end of the world.
No,
And
up
I'd
to
be
you.
over in a second.
Don't worry,
I just
darling.
needed some gate. It was dark, so it was hard to see, but it was clear that on top of that, the guy was nowhere in sight. Although everything is back then, I lived in a considerably remote area in the US. Neighboring houses were a good half-mile apart. Therefore, while my family had met a couple of our neighbors, many of them were complete strangers. This included the resident of the house to the left of ours. I don't remember his name, but it was an elderly man that lived there. He was creepy to say the least. All of the windows on his house were spray painted so that no one could know all this, because every Monday through Friday I had to walk past his house to get home from school. The man would either be standing on his porch watching me, or trying to make conversation with me as I walked by. It got to the point where I dreaded walking home from school, just because I'd have to walk past him. But this wasn't even the worst of it. Maybe once or twice a month, the guy would make the half-mile walk to our house in the middle of the night. He would then shine a flashlight into the window of my room. I knew it was the same guy too, because one of the times I witnessed him walking down the road towards our house. Looking back, this was 100% extremely alarming behavior. But at the time, I thought the best way of handling it was just to ignore it. Therefore, I didn't tell my parents about it. I also remember reasoning that my bedroom was on the second floor, so it's not like he was able to see much of inside my room anyway. Skip to a summer night in that same year, and I was once again woken up by the light of a flashlight shining in my room. Though, this time it was followed by a subtle thud sound against the wall. It felt like my heart had stopped. The only thing running through my mind in that moment was how it sounded exactly like a ladder being propped up against the side of the house. Not long later, my suspicions would be confirmed. A knocking sound rang out from the glass of the window. I looked over and was met with the smiling face of the man gesturing me to open the window. But no, I screamed and ran to my parents' bedroom. I desperately explained to them how the neighbor was outside my window. They went in my room, but of course he was gone by that point. The worst part is, they didn't even chalking it up to me seeing things. Therefore, the police were never called. But even now as an adult, I know exactly what I saw. I try not to think about the intentions that guy had towards my 10-year-old self. I never saw him again after that. In fact, not even a week after the occurrence, and his house had a for sale sign up next to it. Which, I've lived in many different places since then, and not one neighbor comes even slightly close to how creepy that man was.
My family and I have been living in a homeless shelter since the very first day that my city was official. The complex used to be an old motel, and in each room there's about 4 people. Thankfully, since mine is the only family here, we get to have a room to ourselves. That being said, we've been through a number of on either side of our room, and as you can expect, not all of them were good. You have your typical druggies and mentally unstable people, but surprisingly, the worst was a man that we had actually become friends with. Let's call him David. David had been one of our first set of neighbors on the left side. He was a bald man in his late 20s to early 30s of average height and build. He wore glasses, a bright red beard, and he had a friendly disposition. My parents had started talking to him whenever they went out to smoke. My mother could talk to anyone. Well, he's a bit more new. David made me immediately trust him. A horrible decision. My mother eventually insisted that I come meet him. He was exactly the kind of person that I usually get along with. Rude, sarcastic, and always down to talk about really deep and dark things. I befriended him rather quickly, and we discussed everything from stupid conspiracy theories to even childhood trauma. Both me and my 16-year-old brother were actually really quite fond of him, but this obviously didn't last. It started out small. He would talk about sex, his previous wife's affairs, and things of that nature. At first, I was really happy that he was talking to me like an adult. I had just turned 18 years old in February, and I was still a little shocked at all how differently people were treating me. Things had started to escalate fairly soon after that. He started hitting on me and talking about a hypothetical relationship between us. I'm pretty used to this kind of behavior, as I've been creeped on long before anywhere near the age of consent. But it still felt wrong that a man that was a bare minimum of 10 years older than me was being so forward to my barely legal self. However, I'm extremely unsocial, and I recently lost the remainder of all my friends. So I was just really desperate for human contact outside of my family. So I would just politely decline him and just laugh it off. One day when my parents and I were all outside, David came outside as well. At least one security guard that's working at all times. They do meals, do laundry, and so on. Most of them are pretty chill, but there are a few of them who really abuse their power and make the residents' lives miserable. Also, the owners are super shady and do a lot of things that aren't exactly okay. So when David had then said that the security guard was going around the back of the building and looking in bathroom
Get an assessment for UTIs, cold sores, pink eye, and more.
windows to make sure no one was smoking or doing drugs in there, well, my parents believed him. They really just hate the way the place is run, and they're always mad about something. So they were pretty quick to board the how dare they train. I, on the other hand, just took the information with a grain of salt. I wasn't so eager to believe in rumors that really had no ground to stand on. For all I knew, it could have been started by a junkie that was tripping and just thinking what he was seeing was real. A few nights later, when I was using the bathroom, I had heard the crunching of footsteps right outside. Now, the complex is surrounded by orchards, so it's not really uncommon to hear walking among the trees. But something in the pit of my stomach told me something was off. I snapped my head up just in time to then see a pale figure jerk away from the bug screen right on the open window. I quickly finish up, all the while the window never leaving my line of sight. The moment my pants are up, I decide to bolt and then run to tell my parents. They're pretty much both beyond pissed. They pretty much immediately assumed that it was security. That is, until they opened our door only moments after the occurrence, to then see that the only security that was working on that night was still up at the front gate. Not only that, but the man wasn't white. So whoever's face I saw, it wasn't him. This immediately confused them. On the next morning, my parents were asking everyone if they saw or heard anyone outside their bathroom windows last night. There was a resounding no from everyone. But what really struck me as odd the most was that no one had even heard of the rumor about security. It seems like everyone here is extremely paranoid, so the fact that such a serious accusation was apparently not even being discussed was more than a bit strange to me. My parents just assumed that David had just been messing with us, or that someone had been messing with him. I wanted to believe that too. After that, I was so freaked out that I started closing the window every time I went in there. Right around this time, the weather started getting really warm, which meant that clothes started getting more revealing so that we wouldn't fry in the late spring sun. This was a little too much for David to handle, as he started being even more forward than he was before, even around my parents. This didn't sit well with them. It eventually got so bad that they requested he be moved to a different room. He wasn't. I started staying inside at all times when I could, and just avoiding David when I couldn't. He must have noticed this, as he became increasingly aggressive every time he approached me. He would always holler at me from across the complex, and also watch me intently whenever I walked my dog. I had started noticing a very David-shaped silhouette right outside our window in the dead of night whenever my family was peeking into the tiny gaps in the thin curtains. I would really like to say that I told my parents, but I didn't. I was really afraid that they would make a big stink about it and that we'd get kicked out and then have nowhere to go in the middle of a pandemic. So I just kept quiet. David was eventually moved, but not before he scared me one last time. I was once again in the bathroom. I had just gotten out of the shower and I was brushing my teeth with my towel around my body. I had music playing and was dancing around. Just generally having a good time. It was such a good time that I apparently forgot that I didn't close the window. I had left it open during my shower to reduce the amount of steam, and I meant to close it when I got out. Thankfully, the shower was on the same wall as the window, making it physically impossible to see into it. The sink that I was standing at, however, well, that was in full view of the window. This realization then hit me like a ton of bricks when I then suddenly being watched. I tried to act natural, really hoping it was just my paranoia. I finished brushing my teeth, then opened up the medicine cabinet to put away my toothbrush. As I was closing it, I made sure to stop at an angle where I could see the reflection of the window in the mirror. Lo and behold, there he was. David was stood there with his face pressed against the bug screen. I was frozen in fear. The worst part was when he realized he had been caught, he didn't even move away immediately. He didn't even have the decency to look shocked or ashamed. No, he looked so smug, so self-satisfied. And then he moved with his footsteps crunched off into the distance. I never saw after that, and I never told my parents about it or about him watching me while I slept. It still really freaks me out to think about it, especially since he has 2 daughters of his own. I only hope that they're never put into his custody. Even if he doesn't do anything to them, I really can't imagine what growing up with a father that acts like this would do to a girl. Somehow I really don't think that he'd set a good for them. Hopefully you all agree with me. Just for some context, I'm about 5'6" and about 220 pounds, and I'm 15 years old. I'm also in high school and I don't really like talking to people, as I have the worst anxiety. I would say I'm fairly good looking, but nothing to gush about, and a little bit on the bigger side. The story happened in November of 2019. It was a normal day, and I actually had a really great day. I knew that if I enjoyed myself in school, though, that something bad was probably going to be happening at home. I never enjoy myself in school. Everything was pretty good up until my walk home. When school was over, I got on the bus as normal. The ride seemed faster than normal that day. Something was telling me that I needed to call my mom to pick me up from the bus stop, but I couldn't. The previous day, I had gotten my phone taken away for personal reasons. Anyways, I got to my stop and got off. I walked in, and I'm about half of that feeling when you just know someone is watching you. I can't really explain it, but I felt it. I'm now in my neighborhood and there's barely any cars anywhere riding past. The street that I live on is like a horseshoe. It's kind of like a hill. Most of the people on my street are older and barely ever leave their houses. As I was walking down the street, a young man, he looked about 17 years old, 6'3", and had a muscly build. His body didn't really match his age, but I didn't really pay any attention, thinking that maybe he played sports because our town is pretty big on sports and training. Usually I would pull out my phone and act like I didn't see or hear someone trying to talk to me, but today I couldn't do that. He smiled and waved at me, and I did the same because I didn't want to be rude. At first, small talk as usual. Then he began to move closer, and before I knew it, he had his hand right on the small of my back, then guiding me right up the driveway. I tried to struggle, but he wound around my waist so tightly and just continued. I started to he put his hand right over my mouth, and I was silenced. I honestly thought that I would never never see my family again, never experience prom, homecoming, get a job, get married, all of the things you're supposed to do in life. I didn't want to be near him one more second, so I had to think. What could I do to at least stun him? I decided to bite his hand. He then let go. After he let go, I ran down the street and then pulled my key and stumbled to get my key into the door. When I turned to look back, I saw him running down the street, absolutely enraged. He didn't yell or say anything, just ran. I eventually unlocked the door and stumbled into the house and then locked it. I ran to my room and then closed the door. Almost immediately, my mother yells up to me and asks me what's wrong. I say nothing, and I just sit there, too in shock to cry or to do anything. Yesterday I went for a walk, and I had finally decided that I was ready to go back outside, and right as I made my way up to the hill to the top of the street, a wave of dread then washed over me. I wanted to turn back, but I decided to take the horseshoe back around to my house. The horseshoe. The feeling was still there. Since we're in quarantine, I was really surprised to see a figure walking behind me. He had a really large dog with him, and he had then walked with long strides. He then caught up to me rather quickly. As soon as I saw his face, I stopped. I couldn't move. I couldn't move. He then started to smile with such a creepy smile. Even now, I can't get it out of my head. Every time I close my eyes, he's there. He had started to wander down the street until he slowly walked up to me. Hey, remember me? I couldn't respond. It was really rude the way you ran away from me, the lesser until his lips were right on my ear. I'm gonna make sure you don't listen until his lips were right on my ear. I'm gonna make sure you don't run this time. I snapped out of my trance when I once again felt his hand on my waist. This time, however, he wasn't even trying to be gentle. He was practically ripping my shirt. Just then at that moment, I had saw a car turn down my street, and I started waving my hands like a crazy person. By the time they slowed down to see what was wrong, he was gone.
You're not burnt out from doing too much. You're burnt out from trying to manage it all. Burnout doesn't start with work. It starts with decisions. Constantly asking yourself, what's next? What's most important? Do I have time for this? I used to fall behind before I'd even opened my laptop. Now, Motion handles it. The AI task planner takes my entire to-do list, schedule for me. It's like hiring an executive assistant that never takes breaks, never asks questions, and always knows what to do next. It schedules deep work when I'm focused, makes changes when life gets a bit messy, and keeps my day ruthlessly optimized. After a week with Motion, I didn't just get more done, but I stopped feeling like I had to hold everything together. That mental load, gone. That decision fatigue, deleted. Click the button below to start your 7-day free trial. And trust me, 1 week of Motion will completely transform how you work. And I would not be where I am today without it.
He must have ran through the people's yards or something. Hey, are you good? Everything okay here? It was my neighbor's eldest son. I was so grateful for him